So my name is Kathleen Espinoza. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Lafayette, and also a member of the Geography faculty at UL Lafayette. The League is very pleased to host this unique roundtable discussion with Lafayette's current taxing authorities. And an esteemed panel it is, and we greatly appreciate the collective wisdom that you bring to this discussion. So, you know, AOC, Community Media, is recording the event. It will be broadcast several times, I'm sure, over the course of the next couple months. So we're very pleased to have AOC here too. So from left to right, we have Brett Mellington, Manager of Business Development at Lafayette Economic Development Authority. Nathan Norris, Chief Executive Officer, Lafayette Downtown Development Authority. Billy Guidry, Chief Financial Officer, Lafayette Parish School System. Keith Seville, Chief Financial Officer, Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office. Conrad Como, Lafayette Parish Assessor. Bruce Cox, City Parish Councilman from District 6 and Vice Chair of the Council Finance Committee. Donald Segrera, Executive Director, the Tesh-Vermilion Freshwater District Board of Commissioners. Stephen Piku, Executive Director, Lafayette Regional Airport Commission. And David Cheremy, Chief Executive Officer of the Bayou Vermilion District Commission. So let's thank them all. The League of Women Voters of Lafayette works to educate and inform voters. It's nonpartisan and nonprofit. We do not endorse or support candidates or parties, and is open to any gender. No longer only women. So if you'd like to join us, we've got some information for you to do that. Our members dedicate our first roundtable on local government to the memory of Dr. John St. Julian. John was a brilliant thinker and technically skilled contributor to the Lafayette League of Women Voters. The web guide and server for the public, Lafayette Commons, that he created contains the League's Know Your Local Government guide. It's an ongoing body of information about Lafayette Parish governance and source of our discussion today. We will have some time for questions from the audience near the end of the roundtable, so we won't take any audience questions until then. Some white cards have been placed on the chair, so we ask that you write your question down, and a member of the League will collect them for that part of the discussion. And you also have some handouts. We've prepared there's a tremendous amount of information at your disposal today, and some of our panelists have brought some packets of information, so if you haven't picked that up yet, I encourage you to do that on your way out. They've been placed on a couple of tables outside, so that is always. So our first question will go to this end of our panel, for LEDA, Downtown Development, LPSS, the Sheriff, and the Assessor. And that question is this, and we ask also that you keep the responses to 2 minutes. We've got lots to discuss. Lafayette Parish ranks 6th largest in parish population with a far lower property tax, that's millage. Why does Lafayette Parish rank where it does?
Good question. Lafayette is a great community. We've got great people. They have an independent mindset. In 2004, the Bay Area Center for Voter Research did a report and ranked Lafayette the 9th most conservative city in the country. You know, that is significant. Lafayette is a city that is somewhat socially liberal and physically conservative. And that mindset plays into the fact that we haven't supported taxes that support our schools or support our roads in the past. In addition, that independent mindset kind of translates to low participation rates, not only in voting for taxes, but also in civic volunteerism. 16.7% of Lafayette citizens reported volunteering socially and charitably a few years ago, and our neighbors to the east, Baton Rouge, were at 20.6%. So that mindset is kind of translated into the way we view our taxes and the way we view what we do in our community. I'm not sure if that mindset is going to change or really if it should, but what is a fact is that the quality of our schools and the quality of our roads probably will. There has been maybe a little shift in that mindset from the standpoint that the airport tax was approved, very focused tax, very short term, But that may be leading to a little bit of a change or a shift in what we see as that mindset. Only time will tell.
Mr. Ernst?
I'm glad Brett went first, because I think he pretty much nailed what I was going to say, so I really don't have anything to add. I think that's a great summary of why we do stand where we are today.
Nothing to add as well. From my vantage point, it was more seeing that ranking and the impact, from a financial standpoint, and the impact that it has on us. When I first saw our millage rates and saw how we ranked from a school district standpoint, basically about 32nd out of 69 parishes, I said, well, maybe it's because of the sales taxes. So I took a look at the sales tax rates, and realized that there were only 11 school districts whose sales tax rates were lower than ours. So in terms of that, and 19 whose sales tax rates were higher. So that didn't quite explain it either. So I guess I'm enlightened a little with regards to maybe some of the underlying reasoning for what I'm seeing in terms of how we rank in millages and sales tax rates.
Yeah, I think Brett covered it all, and I was just going to speak from a personal level. People that I know and talk to, again, I came into this position from the private sector, and I think the general consensus is, yes, we are a very conservative community, and a lot of people really feel like they're overtaxed, and when you let them know where we stand, they say they don't want to hear that, because again, there's a lot of anti-tax sentiment in the parish, and I think it mostly affects the school system, because that's where most of the money is needed. But it's basically this conception, this notion that we're overtaxed, that I don't really think is accurate. But it is the mentality here among a vast majority of the people in town, that haven't paid. Come.
Well, I have a different opinion than the panelists prior to me. We have a very educated populace in Lafayette Parish. It's been my experience that whenever a taxing body puts a tax on a ballot, if they can explain to the voters what the benefit is to the voters versus the cost to the voters, and it's favorable, the tax will pass. If you don't believe it, look at the history. The library passed a new millage several years ago. That's why you see the proliferation of new libraries in the parish. The sheriff passed a sales tax in the unincorporated area. More recently, the people in Youngsville and Broussard, some of which are the most conservative in this parish. A lot of Tea Party representatives live in those areas. Both of those cities voted for 1-cent sales taxes for recreation. So to say that this is an anti-tax parish, I can't agree with. It depends on timing, number one, credibility of the body that's putting it forth, and other issues that are involved in election matters. For the longest time, the school board has struggled with their credibility with the voters. To some extent, consolidated government as well. The school board, and in fact, both bodies seem to have turned that around. But as I said, timing has a lot to do with it. So now you have the economy that's taking a turn. So the school board pulled back on their tax measure. But my feeling is that as long as voters were told what they were getting for their money, probably that tax would have passed had it, gone forth. So.
Thank you. Our second question deals with the up and downs of the regional economies, and it's going to go to VITA, LPSS, Mr. Conk, the LCG Council, and the Tesh-Vermillion Freshwater District. So that question is, what role do taxes play in your fiscal policies for long-term sustainability through cycles of up and down economies? So, Mr. Millington,
Okay.
start.
Yeah. For years, our state leadership has struggled with the budget roller coaster that we've been on, and I think this year is no exception to that. And while there's really no magic solution that can remedy all of the budget issues that we've got, there are some measures that could be put into place that would help us maybe alleviate some of those wide swings that we've had in our budget. It would help us stabilize our state taxes and would also make us much more competitive in the South, which is where our major competition is from an economic development standpoint, for sure. In Louisiana, we collect taxes locally, and we distribute them centrally. And there's been some discussion out there, and I think there's been some bills floated that never made it through to change that around and collect our taxes on a central, through a central location and distribute them locally. Now, there's a lot of controversy in that, and but the fact remains is that Louisiana is one of the 5 states that collects their taxes locally and distributes them the other way. So we need to think about maybe modernizing that system. Now, there may be some type of way to alleviate all of the opposition to that. I don't know what that might be. There are people smarter than me that can maybe figure that out. But we've got to make it more efficient for business. There are currently 3 bills in Congress that will look at taxing internet sales. To date, it's just been a voluntary, you volunteer to claim the taxes that you pay on internet sales. But if one of these federal pieces of federal legislation comes out, Louisiana is not in compliance with that legislation. So we would not be able to collect on the internet sales. And the internet sales in 2013 were, I think I saw $268 billion, which is 6% of total sales. So we've got to figure out a way to straighten out our tax structure. And if you guys want to read more about that and find out more about it and get some good bedtime reading, there's a 113-page document that the Tax Foundation did on Louisiana fiscal reform. It's very comprehensive. It offers several solutions to each of the issues that we're facing. So just more reading for you, more information.
Mr. Guidry? Mr. Guidry, do you want to go to you next?
Yes, with regards to the school system, about 55% of our revenues are derived from local taxes. Roughly about 20% from property taxes and about 35% from sales taxes. So because of that, our board has adopted a policy that requires that we keep in fund balance and they use the description or the title Economic Stabilization Fund, that we set aside 3 months of operating expenses, basically reserve it to help deal with economic downturns. It's so that with the idea in mind that if nothing else, it gives us time to come up with a plan to either increase our revenues or decrease expenditures. And with the school system, it's going to be decreased expenditures for the most part because our revenues are pretty fixed. So I think that's one of the policies that's been a direct result because I believe that percentage started. We were at 8% just a short 9 years ago. And then we experienced that economic downturn in 2010. The board realized that 8% just wasn't going to do it. So now we're at 3 months, which is about $66 million. And it sounds like a great deal of money. I know every year when we're looking at trying to balance the budget, that's one of the questions we ask. Why are you reducing slots? Personnel slots when you have the $66 million sitting there. And the response is it's not because we have an issue using it, but it can go away very quickly.
Mr. Paul?
Lafayette Consolidated Government is a very complex system of budgeting. You have the city of Lafayette, you have the parish of Lafayette, and then you have individual general funds, a city general fund and a parish general fund. And the parish, in addition to property taxes and sales taxes, also generates income from user fees and service charges. And the city of Lafayette has the additional benefit of picking up money in lieu of taxes from our municipally owned utility system. So we get about, on the current budget, $22.6 million from LUS in lieu of taxes. Under our operating budgets, the City of Lafayette General Fund is the primary operating fund. We haven't, as Mr. Guidry said, we also have a fund balance, and the unassigned fund balance for the City General Fund is maintained at a minimum of 20% of the annual cost of operating our system. The parish is less, it's at about 10%. The one way that we have anticipated the roller coaster effects of our economy as we're experiencing on the downturn now is that we have been very, very conservative in our budget estimates. For example, while the city of Lafayette last year did quite well in sales tax collections, our budget projections only showed a 1.5% increase, which was a good thing because as of January, it's down 6.37%. The parish, we budgeted at 0 increase. The parish is in financial difficulties. Our sales tax collections in the unincorporated area of Lafayette Parish are now down 28.3%. So, in trying to anticipate all of these fluctuations, it's virtually impossible. Our only option, because our charter says we cannot operate at a deficit, is we have to address the budget as the situation makes it necessary. And you can only do 2 things in a budget. You can cut payroll or you can cut services.
Mr. Singer.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the League for having this event, and thanks for inviting us. The way that the Tesh for Million project was set up in the intergovernmental agreement between the federal government and the local parishes requires that fiscal policies consider long-term sustainability. The federal government put up the money to build the pumping station and all of the channels and structures that were needed to furnish a flow of fresh water into our area. This cost the federal government $40 million in the late 1970s. A local district was required to be created to raise the money to operate the facility and to repair and replace features of the project at no further cost to the federal government. The voters of Lafayette, Iberia, St. Martin, and Vermilion parishes approved a 1.5 mil property tax in 1970 to raise the money needed to fulfill the local obligation. This tax has been renewed each 10 years since then and is the only funding source of the district. As required by the contract, the commissioners started a reserve fund when the project first started, in order to have money years later to be able to replace and repair equipment when it was worn out. The Tesh for Million project is now in its 34th year delivering fresh water, and major repairs and replacement of equipment has started and will be staggered over the next several years. The fiscal policy of the Board of Commissioners is to continue to use the reserve fund to make major replacements and upgrade of the infrastructure, but maintain enough money in the reserves to deal with unexpected emergencies. Because of the long-term plan that was started years ago, the operations of the district are not expected to be affected by up and down economies.
Our next question will be for Mr. Mellington, Mr. Piku, and Mr. Norris. Please explain what the current legislative cap is for the local sales tax for Lafayette Parish, and how that would apply to any additional sales tax for your particular taxing authority.
Well, right now, the sales tax cap in Lafayette Parish is 10%, right? I think that's pretty much understood, but that doesn't include the hotel motel tax, any tax increment financing districts that have been established. There are several of those. And any other economic development district taxes that are out there. Those are kind of on top of that 10%. Some additional taxes could be collected, but we have to have the approval of the legislature on that. And I'm not sure what that 1 cent sales tax the state has put on just in the special session, how that's going to affect what we do locally. I'm sure it's going to have an impact. Just to talk to Bruce's point about the sales tax, you know, we're kind of guessing that it's probably going to be about 7% for the year, let down from last year. January was down 9.3%, according to what we saw from January of last year. So we've got to kind of figure that out. You know, the tax, our tax structure is so complicated, it's going to take years for us to straighten it out. And it may take a constitutional convention, I don't know, but we've got a lot of issues to address there.
Mr. Beaker?
Well, thank you for having us. I appreciate you guys inviting us to come out. Right now, that question was a little difficult for us to answer because we don't do legislative cap, and so. But right now, the airport's not pursuing any new taxes. Our millage, sales tax, or anything like that for the future. We just passed the tax. It was successful. Thank you again for those people that voted for it. And we're moving forward in that project. And you should start seeing some work coming out of it. At least some things coming out for the terminal building. I don't want to sit here and say that tomorrow we'll be building a terminal building. That's not an accurate statement. But we have the funding in place and the funding mechanism in place. And so there's really no need for us to seek additional taxes at this time, and no plan.
Mr. Norris?
Yes, the Downtown Development Authority doesn't collect any sales tax, and I really don't have anything to add other than what's already been said about the county.
Okay, all right. So our next question is for the Bayou Lane District, Mr. Conk, the LCG Council, Sheriff, and Assessor's Office. Every year, the assessor determines the total assessed value within each jurisdiction. And its governing authority must set its millage up to its limit according to the amount of revenue it needs to generate. Except for a reassessment year, every year it knows how much it can expect to generate. With sales tax, that is not the case. We hear property taxes overall are a more stable source of revenue than sales taxes. What is your observation or experience on projected and actual revenues from sales taxes versus property taxes? So we'll start, Mr. Sharon, with you.
As Nathan was saying, also we don't collect sales taxes. Actually, we generate sales taxes through Vermilionville, our tourism arm for Bayou Lane District. But I think the question goes more to the heart of is it better to have property taxes or sales taxes? And from our point of view, because of the work we do along the Bayou Vermilion to clean it up, restore the banks, operate our different parks along the bayou, boat launches, canoe and kayak launches, another park on the south side. It's better for us, I guess you could say, to have a property tax because there's a lot less fluctuation on that part. You can offer more steady services to the people of Lafayette Parish. So that's just in a nutshell. I think if we were asked me to go to sales tax, I'd no. We'll stay with the property taxes. Thank you very much.
Well, as it has been pointed out, property taxes are something on which that we can depend as we do our budget process. We know what it's going to be for the coming year. Sales taxes are just the opposite. We begin our budget hearing process in July. Our budget takes effect November 1st, so we are looking at projecting income based on the previous 12 months, but only reflects 6 months of this year, if that makes any sense. And what happens, there's a fluctuation that there's no way of anticipating or expecting. For example, and drawing from Lita's reports, sales taxes are down all across the parish, not just in the unincorporated area of the parish and not just the city of Lafayette. Numbers show 2.3% in Carencro, which is not bad, to 22.1% in Dusong. And what's really of concern to us as a council as we look at the budget for the next fiscal year is that January was the 10th consecutive month in which sales taxes have dropped. So that's a great deal of concern. On the positive side, today, Costco opened. Next week, we're going to have the official ribbon cutting for all of that development that surrounds Costco. Costco was billed as a potential generator of additional sales taxes for the city of Lafayette and the school board as well. We're going to see, because we think we're going to be drawing folks in from the other parishes who otherwise might not have come to Lafayette to spend their retail dollars. So we're looking at that as a strong potential to maybe get us through this year, but that doesn't provide a long-term, stable source of revenue for the city of Lafayette and for the unincorporated parish.
Mr. Siddiq?
Excuse me. Yeah, obviously, the property taxes are much more reliable and stable. As since I've been involved with the sheriff since 2000, we've seen an increase every single year in the property values, which allowed the sheriff, if needed, which he did, to keep that millage up. And again, it's very reliable. The sales tax, I guess the good thing about the sales tax is the monthly reliability of some extent, is the cash flow issue. That can be a problem, if the property tax all appears in the month of December and January. The sheriff's fiscal year, for example, starts, I think, Conrad's also in July, and so there's a cash flow issue there. So we have to actually plan that ahead of time for those months leading up to the influx of a large sum of cash. The sheriff's, about 60% of our revenue is derived through property taxes. So we get a big influx of cash in the middle of our fiscal year, so there's some planning issues go. But over time, yeah, that sales tax, it's up and down, and like everybody says, right now it's very much down. And so it is not something you can really rely heavily on. It's a small portion of our budget, but if you're running it close to a break even and you lose a couple million in sales tax, that hurts. It really does. So that has to be accounted for.
Mr. Cohen?
The handouts that I passed out, look at the third page, there's a spreadsheet on it, and it shows one of the school millages back all the way to 1986. And the net taxable value in the parish in 1986 was $369 million. In 1987, it dropped to $367. Yet the revenue to the school board for that millage increased. The reason why property taxes are so much more stable than sales taxes is because of what is in the state constitution and state laws that allow, when a property total value in the parish decreases, a tax body may increase their millage to bring in the same revenue as the prior year. So if we had a decrease in property values this year, any tax body, ad valorem property tax body, could raise their millage and bring in the same revenue. You can't do that with a sales tax. There's nothing in the legislation that says, oh, that 1 penny could now be 1.25 pennies. It's 1 penny. Whereas with millages, you can adjust them, and they are adjusted every single year. So the taxable value in Lafayette Parish, as I said, decreased from 86 to 87. It did not get back up to its 86 level until 1994. Yet in all those intervening years, the school board revenue continued to increase because of growth and the ability to change their millages each year. So that's why the property taxes are flat out just more stable, because you can adjust for issues that come up.
Could I add something on the sales tax part? Over the years, we no longer spend a majority of our income on goods. That has flipped. Services, we're paying much more of our disposable income on services rather than goods. It flipped from 50-50 in 1970 to about 67% in services versus 33% in goods. So we've really seen kind of a decline in that base of where we collect our sales tax. Most of the services have been exempted from sales tax. So, you know, there's talk, and you can read it in the Bible here, that we need to look at how we put our sales tax on the services that are out there. Some of them are taxed, most of them are not. So, you know, if we want to try to get our sales tax to a more stable base, maybe we need to think about that. And that's just one of those measures that we may be able to implement that might help us stabilize the sales tax. So, just a comment.
All right, our next question, we're going to start at this end of the panel table with Bayou Vermilion District, the airport, Tesh Vermilion, LPSS, LCG, and the Sheriff's Office. What are the long-term consequences to your responsibilities of waiting for a favorable climate to put a tax initiative on the ballot for whatever your particular need is? So, Mr. Chairman, start.
The long-term consequences. Well, as a matter of fact, we have something that will be on the ballot on April 9th. Our renewal is coming up every 10 years, and we're doing that this year. And also we're having a bond issue. We just recently retired some of our capital bonds. We refinanced, we saved a lot of money, but we'll be asking to continue our bond issues, to issue some new bonds to continue the work that we're doing on the Bayou. As somebody said, there's never a good time to ask for new taxes, but these are not new taxes, these are continuation of taxes that have been on the books. And in the long term, well, I guess if it gets voted down, then that's going to have very negative effects on our long-term prospects for the work we like to do on the Bayou. But I think in the meantime, you know, once hopefully we can get approval from the voters in Lafayette Parish, we can continue. But we have continued our work. We do have long-term projects, putting in new boat launches on the south side, redoing the bulkhead at Rotary Point, aeration projects to increase dissolved oxygen content in the Bayou to improve fish habitats, so we can have better fishing and better opportunities for recreation on the Bayou, to really make Bayou Vermilion itself a recreational destination, just like Vermilionville or Acadian Village or, you know, the Cajun Dome or any other tourist venues we have here in Lafayette. I think Bayou Vermilion District, of course, was founded first of all to increase water quality here in the Bayou. Because, you know, in spite of all the great work that the Tesh Vermilion has been doing to put fresh water in the Bayou, that proved not to be quite enough for our urban core here in Lafayette Parish. So BVD was created to increase that. And also was created in '84 when, you know, the oil prices were doing pretty much what they're doing now, even worse. So we decided to diversify our economy, and I think Vermilionville has proven to be sort of the crown jewel of tourism here in South Louisiana, for all of South Louisiana, just not Lafayette Parish. You know, Cajun and Creole is still very much very popular. We get visitors from all over the world, and so I think hopefully we'll be able to continue that good work through a millage renewal.
Wow, that's an easy question for me. I'm kind of the poster child on that one. The climate was right when they passed it. That was passed prior to my arrival. So, you know, the question is, what are the long-term consequences? There were no long-term consequences to the airport. The airport timed it. That was timed perfectly. It worked. And again, the airport's not looking at passing an additional tax or new taxes in the future. So I would say we read the tea leaves properly and put that tax in at the proper time. But I think it goes to the point that's been made at this group is that if you are specific on the tax and you tell the taxpayers where it's going and there's a finite date, and then all the eyes are looking on the airport right now to watch us and see where we go. But we will build an airport terminal there, but the voters are more likely to vote for something like that when they have a finite, they know where it's going and they have a definite a product at the end. So that's an easy question for the airport. So,
Mr. Segura.
I think my message will be very similar. I think that being able to justify the need is a critical thing to consider when putting a tax initiative on the ballot. In the case of the Tesh Vermilion project, there was a favorable climate when the proposal was put on the ballot in 1970, because all of the parishes in the district were being affected by insufficient water, poor water quality, saltwater intrusion, and a threat of contamination of our groundwater. The initiative could not wait because there was an opportunity for the huge capital investment of the pump station and accompanying channels and structures to be paid for by the federal government. Had the parishes waited, that opportunity may have gone away, never to come back. This would have been a very negative long-term consequence. In order to keep receiving the money that was approved in 1970, the proposal must be renewed every 10 years. Each time the renewal comes up, the district must remind the voters in each of the 4 parishes that the renewal will be on the ballot, and also remind them of the benefits that have come to the taxpayers as a result of the project. We must remind the taxpayers that they are getting their money's worth from the taxes they are paying, and that there is a need to continue the project. This creates a favorable climate at renewal time.
Mr. Guidry, we're gonna go to you next. Mr. Guidry?
Yes, for the school district, I think the challenge becomes, or the result, the consequence is centers around our capital improvements, capital projects that are required get deferred, maintenance, day-to-day maintenance projects get deferred. Because when you take a look at the budget, you know, basically when you're looking at about 85% of budget salaries and benefits, and the rest covers everything else, that's really one of the few places that there's an option to decrease. And so what ends up happening is our maintenance projects are deferred, our capital projects are deferred, so that when we do get to the maintenance projects, because they've been put off, they're normally more costly, because it's always it's always cheaper to fix it right when it becomes noticeable than to fix it 2 or 3 years down the road when you just so happen to come up with the money. And the another consequence is, in order to come up with that money, the funding for that typically comes from educational programs. So we're constantly looking at the educational programs, and you'll probably see some more of it in the 16-17 school year, where some of the programs that aren't impacting as large a number of students will go by the wayside, because those funds would no longer be available, you know, for the programs. They're going to be needed to help address some of the deferred maintenance that can no longer be deferred. So for us, I think those are the main consequences that we've seen.
Mr. Conn.
Long-term consequences are not of major concern to me at the moment. The immediate of addressing the parish general fund is critical. Property taxes in Lafayette Parish are inadequate to cover the dedicated financial needs. We just don't have enough money generated by property taxes to cover those expenses that are either mandated by the state or that are expected for services from our constituency. As a result, both the city and the parish general fund subsidize those expenses. It's especially critical for the parish of Lafayette. I'll give you one example which is looming out there. Our courthouse fund balance has managed to cover the operations of the correctional facility until this year. That fund is now depleted. Next year, we're going to have a $1 million deficit in that particular fund. And the subsidizing of that deficit will come from the general fund. And when you do that, it is the general fund that provides the services that are expected by the constituency. Simple things like cleaning a ditch, repairing a pothole, keeping our bridges and our roads in functional condition so that we can handle the traffic congestion. The city of Lafayette doesn't have those major issues. The parish does. The people who really suffer from this and will suffer from this are the nearly 70,000 people who live in the unincorporated area of Lafayette Parish. They do not have proper maintenance of roads and bridges, and in some cases bridges are being closed. There is very poor stormwater control, and they do not have fire protection. So short term, we really need to look at the needs of unincorporated parish of Lafayette.
Mr. City.
Yeah, very quickly, again, this is, I guess, would be a better question for the sheriff, because that's his mindset, but just to give you a little historical, in 2002, as Conrad was saying, sheriff had some things he wanted to do as sheriff, programs and other things. We don't do a lot of capital improvement other than our own needs. And he saw a need for additional funding, and at the time, many told him it was not a good idea. However, at the time, public safety always seemed to be a very popular thing with the voters. They always, at least at the time, thought that that was a good way. If the sheriff wanted to do more things in the public safety arena, they were for it. I don't think that's the situation now. And because now, as Conrad said, you have to be much more specific in telling the voters what you want to do with the funds. But at the time, it seemed to be an issue. And so it worked out for us at the time. A couple of years ago, you may know, we built a new facility out on Willow Street, and the sheriff talked about considering asking for another tax, and several people in his administrative staff kind of said we'd be much better off if we could pay for it ourselves with what we have, which is what we did. It's putting a little bit of strain on the budget, but I think it was a good decision at the time. So yeah, it does have long-term consequences in that manner.
Okay, the next question is for the school system, sheriff's office, or sheriff's department, Vineland, and the LCG council. What percentage of your budget is for operations, and what percentage is for maintenance and capital improvements? Has that percentage of your budget changed or remained constant in the past 10 years or so? And Mr. Guidry, you're up first.
Maintenance portion of our budget probably ranges somewhere between 8 and 9% of the total budget, just depending on what you define maintenance as being. So in that particular case, I'm defining it for purposes of those percentages as building maintenance. So basically, everything else would be operational. The percentages have pretty much remained constant over the past 10 years, but what you've seen is how much money, how much funding per student has changed somewhat. For us, of course, over a 10-year period, our revenues, sales taxes have increased, with the exception of about 3 years. Property taxes on the increase. So we have additional resources. But during that time period, we've also had several unfunded mandates come through the state, retirement being one of them, health is another issue. So I look at it more as to what's happened over the past 2 to 3 years, because during that time frame, our revenues have been they've been on the decline. And during that time frame, in almost every category, if you break down operations into classroom, direct support, building maintenance, transportation, management systems, information management systems, in every one of those areas, the amount we're spending per student has decreased. And the main reason being our revenue sources have decreased and our expenses have increased in some areas, those that I just mentioned, group health mainly. Retirement has been a significant drain as well. So the amount per student has decreased. Percentages have remained about somewhat constant.
Mr. Seville?
Yeah. Well, the sheriff, obviously we're a service organization, so there's not a lot of capital expenditures other than outfitting deputies with patrol vehicles, which have to be constantly rotated and that sort of thing. Over time, that percentage has come down as a as a percentage of the budget, simply because the patrol division has not grown substantially over the years. We're still covering the same basic areas. As a matter of fact, our coverage areas shrink as other municipalities annex sections of the parish, because our responsibility is simply in the unincorporated areas of the parish. Sheriff Newstrom has his focus has been more on the diversion type programs, and those basically are people. And like Billy said, health insurance costs have gotten really gone up greatly. And as those costs go up and the others kind of remain constant, the percentage obviously decreases. So our capital expenditure budget really hasn't changed much over the years, while the other parts of the budget has increased. It's somewhere around 3% now of our total cost. The vast majority of our expenses are based on people. Anywhere from 60 to 70% of our total budget is salaries, wages, and benefits.
Mr. Sharon.
Well, our budget, we have actually two sources for our budget. We have like 1.4 million, which is generated by the ad valorem tax, and about another 1.2 million, which is Vermilionville generating itself. But I was thinking just from the BUD part, as it concerns the bayou, maintenance of operations on the bayou, I'd say about 40% of our budget goes to operational, I guess you would say, salaries, benefits, health, as he's talking about, probably goes to that. Another 40% goes to maintenance, if you consider maintenance like getting new boats, fixing our boat motors, because those guys are out there on the bayou every day using equipment that's not really designed, just for bass fishing. It's usually for bass fishers to go out every weekend or so, but our guys are out there using their boats, those Evinrudes and Yamahas every day, so our equipment's in the shop every so often, so that's a big chunk of our budget also. And for capital improvements, like I said, we did have a capital bond, hopefully we get that continued. But I'd say just from the 1.4 million, probably about 20% of that for capital improvements, I guess. But that's would go to the repairing a lot of the old buildings. We have 7 historical homes, and we have a restoration specialist on site, a master carpenter, and he's constantly doing work on those houses. It takes a lot of upkeep to keep Vermilionville in that kind of good shape. So I'd say it's probably about, like I said, about 40-40-20, the breakdown between operations and capital improvements.
As I mentioned earlier, the budgeting process for the parish and the city of Lafayette is very, very complex. Not only do you have the parish of Lafayette and the city of Lafayette, but then you have up to 50 subcategories that we budget. So to break it down to operations and maintenance for each, the parish and the city I can't provide those numbers, but I can tell you that the way we do business in consolidated government is that the city of Lafayette actually provides the services for the city and the unincorporated area of the parish. The parish, in turn, reimburses the city of Lafayette for those services. Very complicated arrangement. But when you look at the parish general fund, just for percentages, 30% of the general fund goes to courts and the district attorney. Those are mandated by the state. We have no choice in that. And 11% go to paying for elected officials. My salary, Conrad's salary. On the city side, 57% of our budget goes to public safety. A huge number, but it's needed and it's necessary to cover police and fire protection in the city of Lafayette. The city of Lafayette has a 2% sales tax, and 65% of that sales tax goes toward capital. The remaining 35% is for operations and maintenance. Our 5-year capital improvements program for the city of Lafayette is around $238 million. So things are looking good for the city of Lafayette. Parish sales tax revenues, just the opposite. One of the issues with the parish sales tax of 2% is that every time we generate new sales taxes because of commercial development, a municipality will grab it, and we lose that 2%. So we have not had a steady revenue stream from sales taxes, and that's of concern as we move forward.
So this is our last question, and we'll open it to all of you, and we'll start, I guess, with Mr. Norris, and we'll work our way down the table. Is your total projected tax revenue sufficient to accomplish your long-term comprehensive plans or goals?
No, but it never has for the Downtown Development Authority. Essentially, we only get a property tax millage that funds our organization. It's currently generating between $400,000 and $500,000 a year. And within that range, that essentially pays mostly for the staff and a few other items, but it doesn't involve the capital improvement projects that are part of the overall downtown action plan. And so, no, we're not close. But for example, we haven't even, and even when you look at outside sources of funding for specific projects, like for example, the Jefferson Street Streetscape project was almost 20 years ago. We haven't had one since then. In the last fall's budget, through the capital improvement bond program that they had projected. There was going to be the first one in 20 years. So that's an example of something where we would get funding from another source. Other elements of our downtown action plan would include the biggest impediment to development in the downtown right now, which is a lack of parking infrastructure, which will require some sort of public-private partnership. That will be something that, if you look at the downtown, we haven't had any sort of parking infrastructure built in over 30 years. So we've got to come up with other buckets of revenue in order to figure out how to make those things work. But our dedicated funding right now was never really intended to cover all the needs for what the downtown needs to do.
We're looking at, for the 16-17 school year, we're looking at a shortfall, preliminary shortfall of about 13 million. The school year following that, about 11 million, then it drops down to about 1 million or 2 million, and then jumps back up to about 4 million. And this isn't a, for or against charter schools. But the main issue we're dealing with, and with regards to those shortfalls, is the funding that follows the students to the charter schools. So in terms of addressing it, some of the things that we'll be forced to do, and some of it's just part of being fiscally responsible, is taking a look at some of the programs we have and eliminating them. With that will come savings, not only in staffing, but in transportation, which brings us to the point or discussion of rezoning, which is a bad word in the area of education or for our community. But ultimately, we have to maximize the use of our existing facilities. If we're going to do that, we have some schools that have empty classrooms, while others are filled to the brim, and have portable buildings wherever there's a blade of grass. So ultimately, that'll be a part of our response to that as well. So the next few years, I think, will be a challenge. One thing that's in discussion right now in Baton Rouge, one of the items they're discussing is for A, B, and C school districts that Bessie no longer be allowed to authorize charter schools. And we're hoping, from my standpoint, strictly from a financial standpoint, that there will be success there to give us some sort of relief so that we can address what we anticipate happening in the next 3 or 4 years.
I don't think you'd get an argument from anyone saying that police aren't paid enough. And I hear it every day. Nationwide, we don't pay police here very well. Statewide, we're close. We try to keep an eye on what other communities and what cities doing and what small towns. But again, that's really a case where I think the long-term goal of it would be to be able to pay the deputies not a reasonable, but a good salary and make it more of a professional position. With that said, I can't begin to guess what the new sheriff's going to want to do as far as long-term goals. I'm not privy to those discussions at this point. And so to say we're good to go, I just can't answer that question right now. But I can tell you that the new sheriff, as well as the current sheriff and any sheriff before, will always tell you if there was more revenue, he'd like to pay his deputies more.
Answering that question is easy. It's never had enough money for my comprehensive plans. When I took over this office, assessor's office in 2001, we had 0 maps for Lafayette Parish. We knew where no property was other than some generalities. Well, to build that parish map has taken us probably 12, 15 years and a lot of money. So I had to take a lot of my resources and put in that to do the research to find out who owned the properties and where the properties were and whatnot. We're about 95% complete on that. Well, during that same time, I didn't have characteristics on the majority of buildings in this parish. There goes my name. Good, now you can see me better. Didn't have the information on the majority of the buildings in the parish. So I had to decide, do I do mapping or do I get this information? Well, you have to know where the property is to get the information and tie it all together. So now I'm having to shift those resources into trying to capture more of those characteristics on the buildings. And what I mean by that is the roofing type, the exterior structure, exterior material, and how many bedrooms, how many baths, all that stuff that you need to do appraising. We're having to do that now. If I had the money, then you could answer some of these issues when people bring up, why are assessments the way they are? Well, it's because I haven't had the money to do. Why are the roads the way they are? It's because they haven't had the money to do. Why are the schools the way they are? Because they haven't had the money to do it. It all comes down to money. And if you don't have the money, you can't do those comprehensive things. So you have to do it patchwork, as all of us have had to do through the years because of our funding sources and limitations of them. So.
Well, I'll add my voice to the choir. The answer is no. And I think our challenges, the short term, is that in this year, one of our existing property taxes will be up for renewal. That's the library property tax, 2.91 mils. 2017, we're going to address the courthouse complex, the correctional center, and city public buildings. And if you recall my earlier comments about the courthouse and the correctional center, there's going to be a $1 million deficit next year. All we're intending to do right now is to go to the voters and ask for a renewal. Obviously, that's a renewal of taxes that are inadequate to meet the needs. Long term, there's a group of private citizens been meeting for over a year called the Future Funding Needs Committee. They have been focusing on what is the cost of government going forward. We are anticipating a final report from that group either in the latter part of this month or hopefully certainly in April. In going to the constituency, to the voters for additional revenues to finance the services that they expect from us, we have to address economic conditions. We are in a critical portion of our economy right now because of oil and gas and because of what's happening on the state level. The school board had the wisdom to pull back on a new property tax. BVD needs to renew theirs just to continue doing operations. On the state level, what is really complicating the issue as far as we are concerned locally is the sales tax increase of 1 penny. Now, the positive side of that, it is a limited sales tax. So maybe 2 years, 3 years down the line, we might look to that as a revenue resource. But right now, if you live in the city of Lafayette, you pay 8% sales tax. On April 1st, you're going to pay 9%, 9 cents on every dollar you spend. If you live in an area that has an economic development district, or better known as a TIF, like we have at Louisiana Avenue and I-10, you're going to pay 10 cents on every dollar you spend.
The long-term goal of Tesh Vermilion Freshwater District is to keep the pumping station and all of the structures and channels that we have in the same condition that they were in when the federal government turned the project over to us. And we do feel that the funding source that we have at this point is sufficient for us to be able to do that. We don't foresee any need to ask for any additional funding. One of the things that the district has been doing lately, which I think is going to help save money, is to work with other state and local agencies and volunteer groups to do things to improve water quality in our bayous and rivers and to improve the quality of life. So what these agencies and groups are doing is meeting, working together to pool our resources, pool our knowledge, and to make spending of the tax dollars more efficient. Thank you.
At the airport, we receive ad valorem tax, and that is earmarked for our operations and maintenance. The airport is moving in a direction that we are trying to lessen our dependence on that. But to answer your question, the money that we receive does not go to long-term planning. That is other monies and other things that we self-generated through our concessions and leases. But the move in the aviation industry for airports is to move away from it to be self-sustaining. Not saying we're gonna be self-sustaining tomorrow, but we're moving in the direction that we would like to be self-sustaining as an entity that's owned by the parish and the city. And so, but at this point, we still need monies from the ad valorem for operations and maintenance of the airport.
And for us, it's kind of like what Donald was saying, alluding to, because we've formed partnerships also with Tesh Vermillion, lots of other groups, and actually the other parishes, because improving the quality of Bayou Vermilion within Lafayette Parish, it can't be done. We can't, because the water doesn't know there's a parish line there. We have to work with St. Martin Parish, with St. Landry Parish, with Vermilion parishes, and whatnot to help improve that. So we have started working with different parish agencies, with DEQ, with the Soil and Water Conservation Districts also. We have several projects. As a matter of fact, we have a big one coming up, which literally fell into our lap with DEQ, where hopefully we'll be working on the problem of septic tank problems, shall we say, in the parish. Because our LUS and the water treatment, it's even above what needs to be done. But unfortunately, not everybody is on the LUS system, because that's only the city of Lafayette. And like I said, water doesn't know where the parish line ends, doesn't know where the city line ends, and sewer systems certainly are in the same category. So we've been working on different partnerships and with grants also on the Vermilion-Vineville side, also in order to finance a lot of our educational projects. We work very closely with the university here to help train teachers, especially in the social studies and history department, geography, et cetera, because that's part of our mission as a living history museum. And also, like I said, with DEQ and agencies to improve water quality in the parish. So to say, as of now, yes, I think for our long-term goals, just to keep our doors open and be able to talk to these other agencies, yes, we have enough. But we have to bring in other forces, other pots of money, and pool our energies together so that we can all work together for this, the improvement of water quality in Lafayette Parish.
Thank you. So we have time for a few questions, and it's open. Anyone who can ask a
I would like to start.
Oh.
How about that?
Surprise.
And it's not really a question, I wanted to explain a couple of more handouts that I put out for you. One of them is, these two slides were part of a presentation that I did back in the mid-2006-07 time period, showing the needs in Lafayette Consolidated Government in culture and recreation. And the deficit that was showing at that time is about $6.5 million in the red. Now, that's not to say they were spending money they didn't have. No, what they were doing is what Bruce alluded to earlier, is that they're having to take $6.5 million out of the general fund to pay these items. So what happens is you don't get the roads fixed, you don't get the bridges fixed, you're having to spend your money on those kinds of things. Yet in that timetable, election timetable, the millages that were coming up for renewal could have addressed some of those issues, like roads and bridges, Bayou Vermilion, of course, they're dealing with theirs, courthouse and jail, detention center. Back then was showing $1 million deficit. Well, that $1 million, and how we're back to that point again, another $1 million deficit. You have to address this through the millages, folks. Otherwise, you're going to keep draining the general funds, and then people say, well, where's the money for the roads? Well, it's because we're having to pay for these other things that have no dedicated or don't have sufficient revenues in those dedicated funds. So when they come to you and talk to you about these taxes that are coming up, ask them about those deficits and how can we get rid of them, instead of saying, why more taxes? No, we need to take care of what we have to take care of, and that's the jail. And these things are mandated by the state. It's the jail and courthouse complex and things such as that.
With what Conrad was saying, consolidated government, the parish is mandated to operate the physical jail. The millage that supports the jail and the courthouse is the same millage that was in effect before the jail was built. So when the jail was built in 1986, the jail was nothing more than the 7th floor of the courthouse, and that millage was designed to support that facility. There was no additional millage to cover a 5-story building downtown that cost $5 to $6 million a year to operate. So that money too is having to be pulled from somewhere to pay for those operations.
And just an observation, I think that we mislead the general public when we do our budgets every year, because we do something called the adoption of the Lafayette Consolidated Government Budget. And it's a huge number. It's in the $700 million range. Well, a large portion of that is actually a utility system, so take that out of the fiscal picture. What remains is still an impressive number. But if you remove the city of Lafayette budget out of that, the parish of Lafayette has very little money. And that's where the crisis is looming. Well, I shouldn't say looming. That's where the crisis exists today. And I think that as we go through our budget process this year, I'm going to feel obligated that we have to point out, folks, yeah, we have an $800 million budget, but this is how much the parish has. The rest of it is utilities and the city of Lafayette. And remember, you can't mix the monies.
Do you have any questions? Yes.
Is there another area in Lafayette that has a TIF tax?
Yes, ma'am. I think there's 6 or 7 TIF districts in the parish. The city of Lafayette has 1. Broussard has 2 or 3. Scott has 2. Karen Crow has 1.
And this is illustrated on the slide back there.
Did I get it right?
It's obvious to me from hearing the discussion today that if the people of Lafayette Parish do not address its revenue needs, the quality of life in this parish will severely decline. My major concern is our schools. I was part of a group in 2007, 2008 that visited our public schools. And I tell you, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that when you ride around the parish and look at the condition of these schools, to realize that many of our children are in these temporary buildings. And these temporary buildings, unless you've been in them, you don't realize how horrible the conditions in them are. For example, I walked in one and I thought I was going to fall through the floor. I don't know how the students could sit in their desk and not actually fall through the floor. So I encourage all of you, if you haven't done so, to visit our public schools. And I encourage the people of Lafayette Parish, if it's possible, to do the same. And there is a dire need for capital improvement. And unless we are willing to address that, you know, I mean, our quality of life depends upon an educated public. And that ability to educate our people properly is in dire need.
Okay. Do you want to take a question?
Along that line, Bruce, you mentioned a funding committee, a committee looking into.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the school system included in that, or are you just looking at that?
No, we're only looking at Lafayette Consolidated Government.
So what do we do about our school system's future funding?
Well, I think, you know, the tax initiative didn't happen in the month of April. So then I think it becomes a matter of, you know, when do we reintroduce it? So that'll be a consideration there. And again, in the meantime, we'll be looking at programs, at rezoning to see how we can save funding in that way. You know, one of the things we also have concentrated on is the first time we went forth with our tax initiative about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was not successful. One of the reasons we heard was that, well, we want to make sure you maximize your efforts to use all of the internal funds possible to do what you can within your current needs. And so since that time, we've sold $176 million worth of bonds, and it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, without increasing, going to the voters for any additional taxes. We just got a guaranteed maximum price on one of the projects that we have planned for some of that bond, and we're looking at just to that one project, $78 million. So when you sell 126 million, and you're thinking that, well, how can we spread this amongst 42 school sites, and you have one project that's taking up 78 million of that, and there's no athletic facility yet, and a few other things that are needed. It shows you that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we have to revisit that tax initiative. So that'll be a timing issue, because I really think that, and in the meantime, we have to continue to work on maintaining, regaining, depending on what your opinion is, the board and central office, the confidence of the public in the board and central office.
What you also have to consider, in addition to educational issues, is people say, well, what's the big deal about closing a bridge? Because you can't afford to repair it or replace it. Well, we did that a couple of years ago on Robley Road, which connects the Vermilion Parish to Lafayette Parish. Well, all of a sudden, that traffic, which is considerable, their only way to come into Lafayette then was Johnson Street, which exacerbated a problem that already existed. So the consequences are multiple across all the political spectrum.
Any other questions? Did you have a question, please?
You gave the history, Mr. Smith gave the history of the courthouse millage and why it was, or Mr. Conrad, but why is the roads and bridges, the two together, why are those millages so low historically, since those are so expensive too?
We've never had the political courage in the past to go to the voters and ask for more.
Okay.
Cut and dry.
It's not like.
It's the voters that decide.
Okay.
And to make matters worse, on that jailhouse and courthouse, and I can't specify when, but there were times when, as Conrad said, from year to year, when the values increase, you have the option of rolling back or maintaining the millage. Some of those years it was rolled back, if I'm not mistaken, which was even a chance to increase some revenue. And again, the political climate at the time, no one had that. They wanted to say, I'm reducing tax. Nice to say, but it doesn't really help the problem.
That happened in 1996, and the way that works is when we do a reassessment, which we're doing this year, state constitution says that if there's an increase in the total assessed value, then every tax body must lower their millage to bring in the same revenue as the prior year. So the revenue would be neutral. Goes on to say, however, that by a 2/3 vote of that taxing authority, they can raise their millage to the prior year's maximum, which means they would bring in additional revenue. In 1996, parish government, city parish government, rolled those millages back. They didn't roll them up. And now we're paying for that severely in these deficits that Bruce was referring to in the courthouse and jail maintenance funds and other funds.
And keep in mind, in 1996, when we consolidated our governments, we had $12 million in our general fund for the parish. Well, despite all of our economic success, the general fund in the parish right now is about 18 million. So it has not grown proportionately.
Any more questions?
So a solution to the parish problem would be to have the 70,000 unincorporated population join the small towns of the city of Lafayette. Or have the 255,000 city population join the 70,000 unincorporated population. Response.
That is one solution, and certainly it would go a long way. However, the demands on parish government remain, so you still have to have a revenue source to pay for those mandated expenses, such as the salaries of Conrad and myself, the courthouse, the district attorney. Those are mandated expenses no matter whether or not we have no unincorporated area.
But everybody would pay
Everybody would pay, correct.
the same.
Well, the only difference now is everybody pays the property tax. The property tax. Everybody pays property taxes. What's different is in the unincorporated area, they pay 1 cent sales tax. In the city of Lafayette, there's 2 cent sales tax. So another avenue would be an extra 1 cent sales tax in the parish. Unfortunately, that doesn't generate a whole lot of money. Not for the amount of work that has to be done in the unincorporated area. And I would agree that that is a solution, but more revenue is still needed whether or not you do that. You still need more revenue.
What Conrad is referring to, as we exist today, is the unincorporated parish sales tax.
Right.
If we did a parish-wide sales tax, that'd be a different story.
Right.
When we drive over to our neighbors in Texas, and we look at their schools,
Can't get there, Steve.
we look at their they call them public schools, but they look like major universities. And we look at their infrastructure. What are they doing that we are not doing?
That was brought up by Brett early on, and it's called centralized government versus decentralized government. In Louisiana, going way back to the Huey Long days, we decided we wanted a centralized government. So we pay state sales tax, gasoline tax, other types of taxes locally. It goes to Baton Rouge, and then Baton Rouge determines where that money gets dispersed. Income tax also. In Texas, there is no income tax that goes to the state level. All of the property taxes stay local. Their property taxes are extremely high, extremely high. It kind of offsets the income tax situation. But guess what? That income tax we're paying goes to Baton Rouge, and then they disperse it around the state. Lafayette Parish has been considered a donor parish, meaning we send more to Baton Rouge than we get in return. Plain and simple. Whereas in Texas, when you're paying those high property taxes, that's what's paying for those good schools, those good roads. It's all staying local. And they have great schools there. So theirs is a decentralized state government. Ours is centralized. You send the money to that central office, and they decide who gets it.
And that's why in Texas, you see the independent school districts.
Right.
So what would it take for the legislature to make the change?
One word, it's called a revolution. Wow.
Well, we just keep hitting our heads up against the wall, wanting to fix it, and that's the definition of insanity.
Yeah,
Doing the
yes.
same thing over and over and over, and expecting different results. It'll never get fixed unless we make it.
Well, I think the first step is to look at addressing the Constitution, have a constitutional convention. That needs to be done. We have not done that since 1978. And we have so many exemptions built into the Constitution that when the legislature looks at the budget, as they have been for the past several months, the only places they can cut is education and health care. That's not because they want to do it, that's all they can do. And that's based on the constitutional amendments that we have passed over the years.
Some political will, political courage. So we're out of time. Let's thank our panelists.